So I had been at Google for a couple of years, and I was working in the wild moonshots area where, at one point I thought there was like a rumored space elevator, but it was for self-driving cars. And I was working on kind of really early AI stuff. And what I noticed was that so much of our brightest, wildest minds at Google, these like insane inventors with just brains the size of planets, were kind of just thinking from the neck up. They were thinking cognitively, behaviorally about what people are doing, but they weren't really addressing the messy wet lab of what human being really is. So all of the deep social and emotional stuff. So what I started doing was like, project by project, I was just sneaking in kind of these more creative, wilder methods of getting to the truth of people and incorporating kind of all of the layers of being. So it just started out as like the way that Danielle did things, and then it grew into special projects. And then I had a couple different leaders that really believed in the work, and so they started spinning me more things. And then eventually, it was probably a year after, maybe even a year and a half after, I was doing more and more of this work, that I then started calling it the Empathy Lab, mainly because it was this whole body of work that I wanted other people to participate in and feel a part of. So then it made it bigger than me, and I'm always happy to kind of get out of the way. I'm usually the one doing the interviewing, behind the camera, listening. That's the place I'm at home. So the lab was started in that very kind of Alice in Wonderland way, where it was like I fell backwards through a rabbit hole, and then all of a sudden, a year and a half later, there was a lab, and then that was like 9 years ago. So. Well, what's funny about science and soul is that the soul part often stays hidden for us. We're quite happy to talk about the science because it's like, this is subjective and this is proven, and I can be a smart person doing the knowing things where like I can talk about this with command or confidence and I'm protected. I mean, I know I've done that. I use science a lot in the beginning of the lab to kind of neuroscience things for people to be like, come with me to these weird watery human spaces, right? And I think the soul piece is something that we're all still working on collectively, really bringing forward, whether that's just our personal or our family lives or our beliefs or our communities that we're engaged in. A lot of that we didn't feel safe to bring about in our work conversations. So I actually feel like the balance thing, it's funny, balance isn't always 50-50. Actually, it's funny, I've used this analogy before. I feel like there are times where you're scuba diving and there are times where you're snorkeling. And so when we think about the way that science leads us, those are going to be conversations where we kind of need to snorkel with people. We're going to canvas the surface. We're going to have a map of the territory. We're going to try to bring more people with us. And then the soul part, when you're with a more connected group that already knows each other, that's maybe been through some stuff together, like a team that's been around for a while or a team that's just gone through something big, with them, you can go deeper, you can do the scuba diving. But I feel like the space of science and soul, it's not a matter of this. It's more, for me, it's like, it's not a Venn diagram, it's a circle. But that's something that I've had to work years at. I've had to work years at feeling at home in myself and whole in my beliefs and the way they meet my work to be able to talk about them from an integrated place. And, the cool thing about being human is we're always bringing new things into that center. So I think for so many folks, it's just knowing your center gives you a way to find the balance for yourself. And you'll attune, you'll shift it depending on who you're with. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. For me, it's relationships. What I found is that I would end up in places, at conferences like this one, having conversations with really interesting people. And instead of sort of letting that just like go in the stream as you like keep moving on with your life, I kept wanting to bring people together. I was like never good at dinner parties because I'm a terrible cook, but the conversation that happens around a table, so to speak, whether that's metaphorical or real, the idea of different people having ideas that deeply relate but don't appear to is just something that I've always found fascinating. And so what ended up happening is I would meet an ecologist, I'd meet an artist, I'd meet this scientist doing really brave work. I'd meet, like I live in Hawaii, so I would meet elders there. And I wanted it all to be part of one conversation. I feel like that's just a personal thing of mine where it's like, I know that everything is kind of all connected and related. And the question is, how are you moment to moment able to show that? How do you make those connections? How do you realize that something that seems really far apart actually has some deep relationship? So for me, it's just in the human relating that would come together, because I would get ideas about cool things I wanted to make with people. And then I'd pull in other people, and people always get really excited about making something when they can bring their specific gift or skill or contribution to the table. So what I found, and what my advice would be for other leaders who want to engage in this kind of radical collaboration, is figure out not specifically what the project needs to look like or what the outcome of the thing made is. Don't focus on that. Really trust that if you get the right people into the conversation and you invite them in to be the best of themselves, and not just like what they do, but like all of themselves, what I find is people change the way that they work, they change the way that they are, and then like magic stuff happens. And so for me, I was always just like a container builder. It was like, I just wanted to bring people into a circle. And if you do that and you allow that to happen in a way where you're not attached to the outcome, people surprise you, and just really juicy stuff shows up. But I find that everybody, whether sometimes when I was interviewing people too in research, I would ask people to do kind of crazy creative things, because then there's this like curiosity unleashed moment where it's like, why am I doing this? This is weird. Like, and the weird and the wonderful will usually take you through the back door to the truth. And so I find creatively in business, the same thing is true. If you find a sense of play or wonder, there's actually science around this now that I work with, the science of awe. If you create these spaces where people can move in unison, so to speak, this like effervescent creativity shows up. And then it's like, what do you want to do with that? What's interesting is, like, in my early research career, I learned too that if you have a group conversation between 6 or 8 people is kind of the right group. But what I find is that the group size differs depending on what you're trying to achieve. So if you want to achieve kind of vulnerability, intimacy, truth, the kind of things that reveal themselves in a deeper connection, that's like 2 to 3 people, maybe 4 if they already have some relationship together. But when you get into kind of more collaborative, I don't want to call it brainstorming, but sort of like when people are making ideas in the room together, in space together, bigger conversations like 8 people are really nice, because then some people can be in the tide of the conversation, meaning some people rise forward and contribute, some people rise back. It gives people an opportunity to think and reflect and kind of let things come up. And so depending on what you're trying to accomplish, there are different ways of sort of choreographing the emotional and creative experience for people. So if they know what they want, you can think about the group size. But generally, I would say it's almost like you can correlate. If you want the conversation to go deep, less people. And if you want to kind of ground in that way, and if you want it to kind of build up into energy and ideas, then more people, but in a very particular way, bringing them together. Almost like, if you can think of it as like, are you trying to get people to sing together? Because the same way you would choreograph a choir is how you would bring people's energies and creative ideas into the room.